Welcome to Recovered Space podcast, where we discuss science and real stories of eating disorder recovery. I'm Anastasia, and I'm the founder of Recovered Space. And I'm thrilled to co-host today's podcast today with Dr. David Gardner, PhD, and the leading expert in eating disorder field with more than 40 years of experience. Welcome, David. Hi, glad to have you
Hi,
here.
how are you?
I'm doing great. What about you?
I'm just doing terrific.
Excited for having our conversation today.
Okay.
And today we're going to discuss what eating disorder recovery really means. We'll touch and discuss different stages of eating disorder recovery, possible challenges, how important therapy and coaching in this process. We will talk about pseudo recovery and how someone can see if they're progressing in their recovery or they're not. And before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that everything we're going to discuss today is only for informational and educational purposes. We do not give you any medical, psychological, psychiatric, or nutritional advice. So please ask for advice of your physician or any other healthcare provider. So with that said, let's dive in. So Dr. David Gardner, to start off, can you please tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to kind of dedicate your professional career to eating disorder field and help so many people?
Okay, I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I was a university professor for years. I've been a researcher, a psychologist, an author, and the owner of a specialized residential treatment center for eating disorders. So today I no longer practice as a psychologist. I practice as a life coach, which is really aimed at trying to help people in the process of recovery and to really develop a coping skills, strategies to try and deal with eating disorder, residual symptoms, and as well as other problems like anxiety and fears.
Dr. Gardner, from all your experience working with real clients, how would you describe what real eating disorder recovery means?
Well, eating disorder recovery means having really no symptoms of an eating disorder. And that means no serious symptoms like binging, vomiting, laxative abuse. So it means not having any of those symptoms and not engaging in restrictive dieting. Now, that's very hard to do in a society which is preoccupied with restrictive dieting. But I think when people go through recovery and come out the other end, many times they're healthier than the average person in society who is preoccupied with their body, preoccupied with food intake, preoccupied with thinness. So hopefully recovery is not only the absence of serious symptoms, but also a much healthier attitude toward their body and toward eating.
Yeah, this is so true. And I would like to discuss at this point of kind of eating disorder voice that someone can have in their head. And I'm just speaking from my own experience. I've been suffering from eating disorders of a few kind for over than 10 years. And I remember that it took me quite a while to decide that I have to enter recovery. I have to start going through this process. But what always was stopping me from doing so was like that voice in my head that was saying, you're not sick enough. Like there are people out there who are way worse than you are. So you're not there. You don't need recovery just yet. And then when I was doing my research before our episode today, I came to realize how many people who are suffering from eating disorder, different severity, doesn't necessarily mean they're like very bad, but people still talking about exactly the same voice, and this voice says you are not sick enough. So, what would you say someone who is experiencing this kind of thinking when they're deciding about recovery?
Well, it's a bit complicated. I mean, in some ways, I hear it often, people say, I'm not really sick enough. And, because they see the dramatic pictures of people that are emaciated and on the verge of death, and they think that in order to deserve treatment or help and to enter into recovery, they need to be the sickest.
Right.
And that's not the case. The other real problem with kind of the decision about entering recovery has to do with this very strong issue of denial. Well, for example, to enter into recovery, you have to make a decision that you want to change. So changing involves giving up certain things that people have eating disorders really feel strongly about, like being super thin, for example, or exercising excessively. So So there are two parts of this. One, not feeling sick enough, and the other is denial.
Right. And let's imagine that someone got to the point where they're not denying anymore. They kind of got like reached the bottom in a sense. That happened to me personally, and I was like, no, like this is the time. This is the time to start it over. Even though I had no idea how recovery looks like, I didn't have any information, non-scientific, not anyone in my surrounding was suffering. I didn't have my therapist back then, and I believe my question goes: if someone decided that they want to start recovery, what would be the first step for them?
I think the first step is to really get very good information. Getting information and education about the nature of an eating disorder and also how to get past an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can cause people to take pause and say that, gee, I'm not sure that I want to go that far.
Mm-hmm.
But the first step is information, really good information. And along with that, it's important to consult the correct sources about the possibility of recovery. I mean, some people, there are some information out there that says you can never recover from an eating disorder, and that's just patently untrue. So you have to understand that what you want to do is something that's possible.
Yeah, right. And this is so right that nowadays, like internet is great, and yeah, it brings out a lot of information, but at the same time, this information can be tricky and very triggering for people who are seeking for help. And actually, we are here right now to kind of shed the light for people who are seeking for this information, and hopefully, will help them, yeah, to make this decision to enter recovery more solid and profound. And kind of going forward with this topic, when someone decided to enter recovery, they've got initial information, they kind of have this overall idea how it can look like. But can you please tell us a bit about stages of recovery? Like what kind of typical, more or less typical, I know everyone is very different, but like if you notice yourself some kind of milestones that someone goes through during recovery.
Well, I think that recovery is, rather than being best characterized as stages, it perhaps is better characterized by loops that go around and around. So
That's
people
fair.
will make headway and progress, and then they will fall backwards a bit. So it's not a straight linear process. So it's not so there are stages as much as there are different epochs or different places that people can get to. And then there are new challenges at the next step. So I'd say the first step is just making the decision, and then being able to seek out really good information, and then perhaps you can seek out either a professional or either a professional therapist or a coach, or to visit really good podcasts. They'll give you the kind of the pathway perhaps to assist you in the process of recovery.
Yeah, at least it can give you support and navigation through all this realm of information and possible treatment options. And it kind of segues us to my next question, which is for me very interesting. And I've read quite a few Facebook group discussions and Reddit discussions where people were talking about therapy for eating disorder recovery. So, in your opinion, is it possible to recover without formal therapy?
Well, yes, it is actually. Again, therapy is very useful for many people, and I would certainly recommend that for many people, particularly if they have very serious eating disorders. But I should say one caveat is I would recommend seeing a therapist who has a lot of experience with treating eating disorders.
Right.
I don't think the average graduate school training prepares you to treat this highly specialized problem. So seeking help from somebody who really has a lot of experience in this area is critical. Either whether they're a therapist, a psychiatrist, or a life coach, they should be specialized. So I guess that it's important to try and always seeks the kind of help that is consistent with the nature of your problem. So if you have a very, very serious eating disorder, you need to get help from somebody who has access to a form of treatment that might be a higher level of treatment than simply outpatient.
Right. And actually, you just touch on my next question. Can you please tell us difference between this treatment option that are available right now, because as far as I know, we have inpatient treatment, we have partial hospitalization, we have outpatient treatment, of course with the caveat that people have resources, because as far as I know, this treatment can be quite expensive.
Well, I think if you're medically compromised, if you have serious medical symptoms, or if you're very underweight, or if you're having a high frequency of certain dangerous symptoms, then I think you need to, at least part of your treatment needs to be coordination with a medical professional. If your symptoms are less severe, there's a range of different options, from self-help programs. There are internet programs. There are outpatient treatment with a specialist. There are partial hospitalization, involves hospital or an inpatient type of setting for 8 hours a day or 5 to 8 hours a day. And then you go about living outside of that facility. There are also residential facilities, which can be quite useful. And then, of course, there's inpatient treatment. As you mentioned, one of the big deterrents is cost.
Right.
Cost of inpatient treatment can be extremely high. And the other problem is that oftentimes insurance will not cover a full course of treatment. So when I was running a treatment center, we would often the insurance companies say, well, you've got 5 weeks. Well, that may be good for some people, but for some people, it's totally inadequate because they need to gain, let's say, 20 pounds, and you can't gain 20 pounds in 5 weeks. And also you have all the difficulties of trying to address your the symptoms and problems that are even unrelated to your eating disorder in a specific sense. And you need time to be able to do that, and you can't rush it.
Yeah, this is so true. I can heavily relate because, as I said, this is my 4th year in recovery and I'm still recovering. So I'm still getting closer to the state when I can say like I'm fully recovered, or like I feel like very stable. And David, you mentioned self-help. Uh, did you see, like, not necessarily your patient, but like people around you, because you've been doing quite a lot of research work, that people got better doing just self-help?
Well, if it's the right kind of self-help, people can do well. There are some really good books out there on overcoming binge eating, for example, that kind of guide you through the different technical aspects of trying to recover. Some people, though, prefer, rather than a book, they want something more conversational, or they want to be able to ask questions. Obviously, you can't do that with a book. So self-help can be useful for some people, or it can be kind of an initial stage. People do a lot with self-help, and then they might want to seek assistance through a coach, through a therapist, to try and help them navigate further along in the process of recovery.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few times coaching in like when we had been discussing the treatment options available. And can you please tell us a little bit more about what coaching is it in general, and how coaching is different from therapy, like more formal therapy, or like different kinds of therapy that people are going through when they're trying to reach recovery from eating disorder? So yeah, I'm really curious myself about how coaching can help
Right.
someone to recover.
Well, coaching and therapy overlap to some degree. So both of them are dealing with trying to solve problems, let's say. But therapy really is focused primarily, the distinguishing features, focused as therapy is focused upon usually your past and how
Right.
your past contributes to your present. And so it can be useful, but it and is very useful, but oftentimes it's more helpful to be focusing upon the future. And coaching generally focuses upon trying to help people navigate a better future. Also, therapy in some ways can unwittingly cause people's problems to persist. I mean, it doesn't happen always, but it's important to be mindful of the fact that if you have 5 years of therapy with in a therapy that you really feel good about and it's really helpful to you, then how to end therapy, to end your disorder means to end therapy. So that
Right.
can be a problem. Well, with coaching, it's quite different in that you can have life coaching throughout not just the recovery process from your eating disorder, but also to try and address enhancing your life experiences on the other end of recovery, after recovery. So it's like having a really good consultant to help you deal with problems that come up. and they may not always be on target symptoms. They may be actually issues related to work, relationships. And I think we all need coaches.
Yeah, that's true. And, in any event, the eating disorder of any kind doesn't exist in isolation. Like, it's always somehow related to other spheres of life and what's going on around you, like how you doing at school or at university, what's going on at your work and at your home. So yeah, like it's just very good approach that once you feel when you start your recovery, you start feeling a bit more stable and better in terms of like basics, like you're eating well enough, you're not underweight if you were before, or you're just not using maladaptive behaviors to deal with difficult emotions or triggers or situations. The kind of next step to start looking into another areas of life is and see, okay, what else can be worked on, right? What else I can work on to make my state even better than it is right now. But again,
Mhm.
personally, I know quite a lot of people, like just in my friends group and an extended group of friends, that they did benefit both from therapy and from coaching, not necessarily only from eating disorder, but from different kind of other issues which all of us to some degree can experience throughout the life. So it's always a good idea to ask for help if you feel like, nah, it's kind of too much. So yeah.
Well, one of the things that's important to remember is kind of therapy is designed to get you from sick to well. And
Right.
coaching is designed to get you from having certain problems past well and
Mhm.
into the future, trying to think about how to best optimize your life experiences.
That kind of made me remember one of the quote I just heard recently from one Jungian psychologist. I don't really remember his name. He said, when someone comes to my therapy, I always tell them, you're not a disease. You shouldn't be cured. So it's everything all right with you by default. You're not a disease. I don't need to
Correct.
cure you. And this struck me so hard. I was like, wow, this is interesting because sometimes that was my not problem, but like my point of view when I just started therapy. I was thinking like, yeah, this someone magician will do the work for me, and I'll
Hmm.
just feel better. And then apparently it's not the case. It doesn't work like that. And
Right.
anytime I remember I was so angry at my therapist because I was asking her to give me advice and she never did. I was like, no, Nastya, uh, this is on you to decide, not about eating disorder, but like different things related to that. Like, what should I do? Shouldn't do? And it was like, yeah, but why? But then
Well,
progressively over time was like, that was very good answer to me.
there's a tendency when you have a problem to have that problem define you, to
Right.
say, I am an anorexic. Well, that's not really correct. You're a person who happens to have an eating disorder, but it doesn't define you. And I think it's a big problem when a disorder tends to really be highly circumscribed in defining you as an individual. That's a mistake.
It's so true. In the same time, it's so hard to get rid of this kind of stories you're telling yourself. Because like the story that I'm anorexic or the story I'm a bulimic because I was both. Yeah, kind of segued from anorexia nervosa to bulimia nervosa, and that was kind of a cycle, such a dynamic. And then it took me like a long while to detach myself from this diagnosis. And I was like, no, I'm way more than just these words as this diagnosis. I cannot be defined only by that because I'm this and that. It's just something that has happened to me, and probably unfortunately it's happening to someone who is listening to us right now. And my point, it's not who you are. It's just
No.
probably some part that happened to you, and you are so much bigger than the story that is going on right now, and probably the story that have happened in the past.
Yes, I'm not really fond of the verb to be. I am. I mean,
Yeah,
really, you have this problem, and
yeah,
it's not doesn't define you. It's a bit dehumanizing for a
right.
disorder to define someone.
Yeah, this is true. And actually, we kind of covered a little bit just as an intro about different treatment options available, about therapy, about coaching. Like we touched a bit about pros and cons, what the difference, and surely we will speak more about that in our next episodes. But let's talk a little bit about the nutrition and how nutrition is important during someone's recovery. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about the condition where something goes wrong with the attitude towards food and body. But can you please tell us how nutrition is important when someone is recovering?
Well, nutrition is very important, and it's important in a way that kind of unifies most eating disorders, not all, but most eating disorders, which are characterized by restricting food intake, highly restricted food intake, and weight loss. And so it really is characterized by undernutrition for at least a period of time. So people typically get the idea in many different ways, or there's different ways that people can actually get the idea, but that they need to lose weight. And almost all weight loss is successful in the short term. I mean, it's very simple. So everybody can lose 10 pounds in the short run, almost everyone. But then what happens is you begin, as undernutrition begins to take its toll, and as studies have shown, people who are undernourished end up, for longer periods of time, end up having a high likelihood of engaging in binge eating. So
Right.
binge eating is kind of a normal response to undernutrition. So I guess in answer to your question, nutrition plays a very important role in recovery because it has to be adequate and it has to be sufficient to be able to undo the adverse effects of undernutrition.
Yeah, this is totally makes sense now, when I'm hearing this from you, from someone who can give me the rationale behind it. But before, I wasn't able to put it together, like if I'm not eating enough, this kind of logical that I'm being eating right now. Because
Well,
like
also,
char
it makes complete sense because if you think about the messages in society in general, both the media, friends, relatives, parents, many people advise people to lose weight. In fact, losing weight is supposed to be healthy.
right.
Well, it may be healthy, but first of all, not many people do it and sustain it over a long period of time. So this undernutrition ends up over time, then beginning to reveal the adverse effects of starvation and weight suppression. So weight suppression is the key element of eating disorders. So the way that nutrition plays a role is that your nutrition has to be adequate, and you have to be able to reconcile some of the concerns that you have about weight and shape versus the positive effects of health due to adequate nutrition. So adequacy of nutrition is really critical. And weight suppression is the key linking about 90% of eating disorders together.
Wow, that's impressive.
There
And
have been studies of college students, for example, that engage in weight suppression. They have a tendency to binge eat.
mm,
There's a study showing obese individuals who've been successful, quote, successful
right.
dieting. They will, after a period of their success, then they begin binge eating or overeating to the point where they restore their weight. There are experimental studies where people are undernourished. They have the tendency to engage in binge eating. So usually binge eating has a corrective feature to it. It ends up letting people get back to what would be more of a natural weight.
hmm
But if you have an eating disorder, you don't want to do that, of course. And so there are various strategies and techniques to try and maintain that weight suppression. It then can turn into pretty serious symptoms once that goes so far.
Yeah, and this I can heavily relate here because yeah, in my case, I can't even remember how many years I've been with my weight being suppressed so much. I wasn't able to handle it anymore. I was just hungry. And it kind of turned me to more of a binge purge cycle. First of all, if that okay, if people who are suffering from eating disorder cannot necessarily understand their satiety and hunger signals, and then probably how much time hypothetically can it take for people to get back to this feeling of like I'm eating adequate, like I'm not under eating, I'm not overeating, I don't feel like crazy full, like I'm fine.
Well, it's important to remember that people that are weight suppressed and have an eating disorder, there are two conflicting things going on with them. One is that their body and their biology probably wants them to be at a natural weight. Their
Right.
psychology, on the other hand, wants them to be weight suppressed. So these two things are in conflict with each other. So the question in a way, I understand what you're saying about it being a personal decision, but in a way, I think it's mostly an empirical decision and not just a personal decision. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you think about it for a moment, I mean, if small children rarely ask, am I hungry? Am I full? How
That's
do I feel about this food?
right.
Your pets, rarely do you see them contemplating, kind of looking up at the ceiling saying, am I full or am I hungry still? No, most organisms that are not exposed to the kind of societal dictates that suggest that you should lose weight, and the personal, when they're internalized, the personal commands that say you should lose weight, when those aren't operating, then people do quite well. So, but the problem is that in deciding whether or not you've eaten too much or eating too little, it has a lot to do with two things. One, where your weight is. If your
Mm-hmm.
weight is stable at a natural weight, then generally you don't have to worry about that too much because hunger and satiety cues operate pretty well, particularly if you're eating foods that aren't the typical American diet, which is highly processed foods that have a tremendous amount of sugar in them. If you're just eating regular foods like people used to eat, then usually people they hunger and satiety are not a problem.
Right.
The difficulty is that people who lose weight, there's a dysregulation in hunger and satiety cues, because when they're weight suppressed, their biology wants them to gain weight. And as you mentioned, their psychology tells them that they don't want to gain weight. So they stay weight suppressed for as long as they can. But the studies have shown that even if you just take normal men and they go on a 6-month diet where they lose 20% of their body weight or so, and then they regain the weight because they don't have eating disorders, so they don't have any reluctance to gaining weight.
Right.
Many of them binge their way up to that weight, which tells you something that's important, that binging is not necessarily just a psychological symptom. It's a physiological response to undernutrition. And the second thing is that it took these normal men that just had one bout of restrictive dieting, it
Right.
took them well over a year for their hunger and satiety cues to normalize. So even after they were weight restored, many of them engaged in binge eating. This is from this classical starvation study, which was published in 1950 by Ansel Keys. So it's a very famous study looking at the adverse effects of starvation. So it's important to remember how all of these things fit together in judging the personal experience of hunger and satiety. If you have an eating disorder, very likely that the mechanisms that dictate hunger and satiety are highly disrupted. And so in a way, rather than paying closer attention to them, you may have to rely upon external factors like guardrails telling you how much you should eat and when, because the natural mechanisms that determine eating behavior, the urges to eat and hunger, are totally disrupted.
It just kind of leads us to the next topic that we surely will discuss in the following episodes about like meal planning and how someone should approach meal planning, and that we do have a few different like options and approaches to meal planning itself. Yeah, depending on what kind of person you are, would you like to be more guided and strict, or you want to have more flexibility in your meal planning? But yeah, it totally makes sense. I just want everyone who listens to us right now just get this idea: the food is not enemy for you. This is the medicine, this is the cure.
You're absolutely right that meal planning, one of the advantages of meal planning or summing up with some structured plan of eating, tends to help you feel less guilty, because you actually say, this is the plan that's been agreed upon in advance and we just need to follow through with the plan. It kind of takes some of the decision making out of the process, which I think the decision making can be laced with guilt, because if you decide to eat, then you might feel guilty about that decision. And also it runs, this idea of structured eating or meal planning runs against some of the common views out there about how to get past an eating disorder, one of which is mindful eating. And that is that there is this emphasis upon trying to really pay close attention to whether you're hungry or full. Remember, if your hunger and fullness signals are broken, then how do you pay attention to broken signals? So if you have a serious eating disorder, you have to understand that your hunger and satiety regulation systems are broken for the time being. They'll get better, but they're broken for now. So to
Right.
simply try and force yourself to pay closer attention, it's a little bit like telling somebody that's inebriated, pay close attention to your, to your cognitive abilities. Well, I don't know that that helps you because they're totally at this point they're harmed, and
Yeah.
so once you sober up, you can pay close attention to them. But during the period of inebriation, then it's very difficult. The same is true for an eating disorder. If to try and tell somebody to pay close attention to something that's broken, it just may not be very constructive.
I totally agree here. And honestly, like from my story, uh, I was not very lucky to get like very good support team in my recovery. And honestly, I didn't know that structured meal plan can be that much of help for me. I just didn't know that. I didn't know that. When I was doing my research, I never came across like, yeah, girl, you should have this meal plan or at least follow 2,000 calories diet at least to get better. And yeah, I just started eating a lot, and unfortunately, I experienced very severe refeeding syndrome. I didn't know about that again. I was like, oh, something very wrong is going on with me right now. And refeeding syndrome, you can talk about that, or you can give you just a description or like just to understanding what refeeding syndrome is for like our audience. But the point I'm trying to make right now, please follow meal plan. If you don't have it now, no worries. We're gonna help you to put together your very good meal plan, or we'll give you some links and researches and papers. Yeah, just to give you the rationale why the meal plan should be rather than that there is no meal plan. Because in my case, there wasn't a meal plan. It wasn't.
Well, and there are different approaches that may be different for different groups. So for somebody that's really quite underweight, to start eating again is terribly frightening. And so if there's some plan that is designed also to not, I mean, obviously it's a big hurdle to get to the point where you recognize that you need to gain weight.
Right.
But if you need to gain weight, then it's really not helpful to simply eat everything you can. And
Right.
remember that you shouldn't feel guilty about that because it's a natural response to being weight suppressed over a lengthy period of time. Almost everybody with restricting anorexia nervosa 10 years later reports a lot of binge eating. So binge eating is a very natural response on the part of humans and other animals in response to food deprivation and weight suppression. But so for some people that are pretty seriously underweight, meal planning can be very helpful in getting them started, putting guardrails on eating, not eating too little, not eating too much, and having a good game plan about what they should be consuming each day. And then by monitoring their weight carefully, you can pretty well predict what the rate of weight gain should be. And also beginning to gain weight, you're usually starting from a position where your metabolic rate is very slow. And then as you begin to be eating a bit more and gaining weight, then your metabolic rate increases. And then you can actually eat more because one of the keys to how much energy your body needs is metabolic rate. And so, but for some people, for example, that are quite over the average weight, larger people, and they've never been highly weight suppressed and that are having binge eating problems, sometimes learning to just feel less guilty about foods that you prefer or like might be helpful. And trying to engage in a less rigid form of meal planning might be useful, where
Right.
it's designed primarily to promote health and not lose weight, maintain a stable weight, even though it may be a bit higher than the average person. So there are different approaches, I guess, to meal planning depending upon the nature of one's fear and the nature of one's disorder. And but some of the approaches I'm not that fond of, which I think I've mentioned and I've written about, and that is that to be focused too much on mindful eating strikes me as a problem because it's trying to teach somebody who has a broken system to pretend like it isn't,
It
and to
isn't.
pay closer attention to a system which is not giving them realistic feedback.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like a good idea, actually.
I think it's well intentioned, and But the best people to pay attention to mindful eating are people that have never had eating disorders and
Right.
just trying to enjoy food better.
Yeah, just
I
have
mean,
fun.
yeah, it's just like, I mean, it's just like people that are wine tasters. I mean,
Yeah.
wine aficionados. They pay close attention to wine. As to most people, just slug it back. No, they pay close attention to it. And and the same is true for gourmet chefs who don't have an eating problem. They pay close attention to food and hunger and satiety and pleasure cues, but they don't have a a disrupted hunger and satiety system.
Right.
So for them, paying closer attention is more of an art form. One of the things that I think, Nastia, that is important to emphasize, and that is, although you describe having refeeding syndrome, I think it's important for the audience to know that actually refeeding syndrome is very rare. We treated maybe 1,500 very seriously emaciated patients at our treatment center, and we never had an incidence of refeeding syndrome. Now we did have some people who had, had some bloating and had some other uncomfortable symptoms for sure, but it was pretty rare. So it's important for people not to freak out too much about the likelihood of refeeding syndrome because it's pretty rare. But certainly to eat unlimited amounts of food and to binge your way upwards in weight is not healthy. It's uncomfortable, produces enormous guilt and depression and a sense of self-blame. So there are many reasons to try and come up with a good plan that's a balanced plan for eating that does a few things, both prescribes food like you would prescribe medicine, because actually people that are underweight need food like medicine. It is their medicine.
Right.
And so they need to have a certain amount of medicine, food, and they need to space it out in a way that makes some sense over the course of the day, because many people with eating disorders make the cardinal mistake of saving all of their food for the last 10 minutes of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not good. That's kind of like practicing binge eating.
You know what?
So you
Yeah.
need to spread it out. It needs to be adequate, and it needs to be also a certain amount that is not too much, not too little, and consistent with the objectives that for weight restoration, if that's an issue. You can't do that just mindfully. You have to do
Yeah.
it through structure.
That's right. And thank you for making this comment about refeeding syndrome, actually, because I was just speaking about my experience. And as I said, because I didn't know what was right approach, it just happened to me like that. And I'm very happy to hear that it's very rare. It's very rare. And probably was just not lucky enough.
You're an unusual person, and that's good. A special person.
Sometimes it's good to have outliers because compared to them, you don't look and feel that bad. You're like, oh, come on, someone else got kind of worse. I'm
Right.
not that bad.
Certainly to be at a low weight and start binging and have your weight go up rapidly because you're binging is just not healthy, both physically or psychologically.
Yeah, right. And kind of continuing this topic and question about challenges in recovery, like based from your experience, and you've been working with a great amount of people and clients and patients, like what can you lay out as challenges with people starting it into the recovery when they are moving forward, like let's say first year, or probably let's say in like 5 years time frame?
Well, I think the biggest challenge in recovery that is almost universal is trying to help people get over the anorexic wish. And the anorexic wish is I really want to recover but not gain weight.
Right.
It's a nice thought. So that's the biggest hurdle, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because people may want to recover, but it's the weight gain that is a problem. Now, after people are able to be weight restored, some people it begins to reveal other difficulties along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So one patient once told me, I think that I've recovered from the anorexia, but I haven't recovered from the nervosa. What they meant was I've got some psychological issues that I haven't recovered from, and I need some help with those. but I'm kind of over the weight regain problem. So I guess the biggest challenge to recovery is in the beginning, trying to deal with the anorexic wish. I really want to recover, but I don't want to gain weight, or I just want to gain 2 pounds and
Mm-hmm.
still remain 20 pounds under where will probably be a realistic weight for me to be. And then later on in the recovery process, it's getting over the nervosa part. And one of the big mistakes in treatment, and one of the big mistakes actually in the recovery process, is that some people want the psychotherapy. They want to be helped with the anxiety and depression, but they don't want to change their weight or their eating. So what is happening is that they really like the psychological ends of things. Please help me with my depression, but I don't want to gain weight. Failing to recognize that much of their depression may be secondary to weight suppression.
Right.
Their anxiety and their obsessionality
Mm-hmm.
may be secondary to being weight suppressed. So the first hurdle is not wanting to change weight or eating habits. Second hurdle, I think, is trying to later on wanting the psychological help, but not wanting to change their eating or their weight. And the third problem is just the emergent psychological problems or distress and worry and life issues. Deal with a troubling relationship might be much more prominent when you are no longer suffering from the acute phase of the eating disorder, because now the eating disorder is no longer preoccupying you.
Right.
And so now you're dealing with other issues like relationship issues or work issues. And needing help in those areas are equally important to try and strengthen one's resolve in recovery. The other thing that's important is that it has such a dramatic adverse effect upon relationships. I don't know of many patients that I saw or people that I've seen coaching with eating disorders that while they have an active eating disorder, having a sustainable, healthy relationship. Because most people don't really want to be in a relationship with somebody who has the difficulties that they can't eat. They're constantly thinking about food. They're planning food. They end up dictating what other people should eat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard on a relationship. And actually, people that have an eating disorder tend to be more involved with their eating disorder than they are with the other person. So the only people that can really tolerate somebody that has a serious eating disorder is somebody that's probably pretty mixed up themselves. Right. And so I think most people on some level understand the importance of relationships in terms of securing happiness in their life. And understanding that their eating disorder, the big disincentive for an eating disorder is that it precludes most healthy and meaningful relationships.
Yeah, this is so true. And can you please touch on the topic of relapses? Because when this happened with me first time, that probably happened after 1.5 years. It was a very small episode, but it did happen. I didn't realize what was it, and I got a bit messed up in my head. Like, wait a minute, but I'm doing great. Like, what just happened? And if you can tell us a little bit more, what relapse is it? Like in general, is an event or a situation what happens to someone? And then the next question: how someone should approach relapse?
Well, okay. First of all, relapses. We can maybe talk a little bit about the different ways in which different aspects or different ways that one can define a relapse. But relapses are common. As I think I said earlier on, recovery is this spiral upwards, an improvement with some setbacks here and there. And so relapses are to be expected. And I think it's important to be mindful that you shouldn't feel guilty about it or feel badly, because they're to be expected during the course of recovery. Relapses could be something that seems seemingly small, like people will say, gee, I relapsed because I ate a donut. Mm-hmm. Or they'll eat a little bit out of their meal plan and they'll say, I've blown it. Forget it. Yeah. Forget it. I'll just eat everything in sight because I can't call myself being in recovery anymore because I've blown my recovery diet. Well, that's a mistake because these things do happen. And sometimes it can be something very small, eating a little bit of food or a little bit more outside of what their intentions are can cause someone to feel discouraged and feel like they've really gone downhill. So it's important to understand that almost everyone during the recovery process has backslides, and they need to quickly recover the resolve to get back on track.
Right.
Because a relapse, a setback, doesn't need to turn into a vicious spiral downwards. But if there is more of a spiral downwards, still it's important to understand, that the sooner that you can interrupt the process and get back on track, the better. But all the while, not beating yourself up for having a backslide. That's important. It's important also to develop strategies to try and avoid relapses or avoid what you consider to be a backslide.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if somebody has eaten a little bit more than they think they should, rather than saying to themselves, I've blown it, who cares now since I've screwed up, I think that they can simply say, rather than I'm going to go throw up because I've eaten more, say, listen, I'm going to delay it for 30 minutes.
Right.
Well, in that 30 minutes, oftentimes people kind of recompose their strength and their resolve to try and not go back as far as they could, and that can be helpful. Or engaging in distracting behaviors that calling a friend, being able to listen to some really cool music that might be have at a high volume, that might be very useful. So trying to anticipate relapses and understand what the triggers of relapse might be, such as eating outside of your guidelines or eating a sweet that you prohibited yourself from eating, and then being able to try and really also exercising a tremendous amount of self-compassion and forgiveness. I mean, this is something that people with eating problems tend to be somewhat perfectionistic oftentimes. And so anytime they make a mistake, it's horrible. Not just a mistake, but it's a catastrophe. So being able to try and understand that relapses or setbacks do happen. Recovery is not a straight line. And also to understand if you do have a problem, that does not mean that recovery no longer is a viable option. It means that you need to be able to get back on the horse of recovery and to try and do the things that have been very successful in the past.
And that this is so great that people who listen to us right now, they can at least have this hypothetical idea like, okay, this is spiral process, I'm going up, up, up. And probably in some way it can be bump in the road or kind of hiccup, but it's nothing. It's not a tragedy. It's something that I'm kind of aware of, and I will be strong enough to have some strategy how to go about that. And we are here again progressively to help people to develop these strategies, how to go about the relapse, what they can do.
It's also, I think, important to mention that it's important to really be vigilant about certain circumstances that might precipitate a relapse. So somebody that's had an eating disorder and maybe is coming out of a bad relationship, that might be a trigger, or for actually going back to something that's familiar, which is the eating disorder. Or it may be that a relapse can be precipitated by pregnancy, for example. So one's been pretty well at a stable weight, but all of a sudden now one is gaining 20 kilos. It's important to that can precipitate body image concerns and worry about weight gain. Sometimes training for some kind of athletic event can precipitate a relapse, because it involves, sometimes people believe that I'll run faster if I'm lighter, which is actually not really the case.
Yeah.
Or one might be deciding to, during the course of relapse, to take ballet lessons. You mentioned ballet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I once did a study of professional ballet dancers. There's so much pressure on them to conform to the look, the George Balanchine look, that they start dieting, even though that's not their wish independently, but is because either a coach or a teacher suggests that you need to lose weight. this could be a precipitant of relapse. Um, Comments from parents, friends, relatives uh, can also sometimes be something that would uh, cause somebody to fall backwards in terms of relapse. So being mindful of the different things that can happen that can be increase your overall psychological distress or can lead you to believe that the pathway toward self-improvement is to lose weight.
Yeah, and this is so true. And like in my case, one time relapse has happened to me because of I lost my job. It was very unexpected to me, like very much so. And I was like, oh, what's going on? But honestly, I believe I was just lucky enough that I pulled myself together quite fast. And I was like, okay, Nasta, I know what's going on right now. I know why you're kind of getting back to what like very familiar to you, but it wouldn't really serve you in the long run. Okay, let's just stop here. And yeah, I literally called my best friend. Literally, I just called her and said, hey, Sonia, it seems like, yeah, I'm kind of in a bit bad place right now. Can you please distract me? Can you please help me right now? And it worked just perfectly, just perfectly. And actually, regarding the point you just made about the comments, right? When people can comment how you look, because probably someone over the course of their recovery, they might gain some weight. And this is actually what happened to me. So I gained quite decent amount of weight. I learned how to love it. It took me a while, but I learned not love it. It's not the right way to say it. I learned how to accept it, that this is still me, and this is kind of something that allows me to express myself in this world in the way I want to express myself. And I do remember quite vividly, I was very afraid of my parents, especially my mom, making comments of my look. And especially it was in the beginning of COVID-19 and the pandemic time, and I didn't really see any other people, right, from work, friends. And I remember that in probably in a month after I started my recovery, I just posted on Instagram on my personal page, and I just called in and said my parents like, hey guys, I know that I probably gained some weight. Please don't just point me out in it.
Well, it's all equally important to remember that much of body weight is genetic.
Right.
And people's natural weight varies tremendously. We're not used to thinking of that. We're used to thinking that body weight is something that's highly valuable and is actually someone's personal responsibility. But there are certain environmental influences of weight. So, for example, our Western eating patterns could be changed, and that would actually probably cause the entire population to, assume a lower natural weight. But mostly natural weight is governed by genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to understand that. That's harder to do within the context of society, which is telling you that you can lose weight. It's up to you. How many diet ads are there out there? How many diet programs are there out there? How many success stories are there out there of people that have lost weight and kept it off? You don't see the post-success stories where they've gained it all back.
Right.
Or we all know somebody that's gained weight and we admire them. But weight is mostly biological. And you can kind of predict what people's weight likely would be. And it's a lot like my height. You're kind of born, you might be a bit lighter than average, a bit heavier than average. You might be more. There's a certain amount of malleability, but it's very limited in how much weight people can maintain below their highest weight ever, for example. It's very difficult. So we need a lot of compassion and understanding related to weight, and not think that it is related to self-control and self-discipline. It's related to two things: genetics, and it is to some degree related to the Western diet.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner, for this huge message of relief, honestly. Like to me personally, and I'm sure for many, many people listening to us right now, like just getting this idea that your weight somehow been determined without your input. It is for sure still have your input, but there is something that out of your control. And this is just, to me, it's like big long breathe out. Like, yeah, like I can't, yeah, for sure I can feel kind of, not good, like about my history, about my like family and all my, genetic that I'm getting from. but I can't change it. And I can just accept it and try to find some peace and calm and love within, rather than fight and always, you know, change it. So thank you. It is very, very helpful and huge relief, honestly. Uh, Dr. Gardner, is anything I didn't ask you, but you would like to tell us about recovery as a process in general before we close enough for today?
Well, I think I just really want to emphasize that I'm hoping people enjoyed the information that they received in this podcast. But I really want to make it very clear that this is not a simple issue to address, and people should feel that I guess learning things, getting good information, high quality information is very important. But it's important also to understand that this is a process. It takes time. And this is an area where there should be tremendous self-compassion and a real sense that this is possible to recover. There's no question. Anybody that says recovery is impossible, I can show you quite a few people that are living a very healthy and normal life and don't have any. In fact, they're healthier than the average person
Right.
because they have a very strong resolve to counter the inappropriate messages in our society. So recovery is possible, and to not give up hope in the face of setbacks. So I just want to say this is the first step for people to hear information, try and continue to pursue good, high quality information, and to be part of a program that really can facilitate the process of recovery.
Yeah, that's so true. Can't agree more. Thank you, Dr. David Gardner. It's been such a pleasure to talking to you today, and I can't be proud any much more that I'm here with you, trying to get the best information possible to put it out there and to try to make lives of millions of people way better than it probably is right now. So thank you very much, and talk to you very soon.
Good. I look forward to that. Take
Yeah,
care.
thank you. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.